All right, welcome. Good morning. It is it's Thursday, February 23rd. And just wanted to welcome our guests today from Pathways Vermont. We had part of our introductions to concepts, and Hillary, it's good to see you. Lindsay, it's good to see you, but we're going to go around the circle and introduce ourselves. Representative Tom Stevens from Waterbury.
Kathleen James, Manchester.
Joe Parsons. Thompson, Groton, and Newbury, sorry.
Ashley Bartley, Fairfax in Georgia.
Dennis Labonte, Lyndonville.
I'm Elizabeth Burrows, Windsor 1, which is Heartland, West Windsor, and Windsor.
And I'm Larry Labor, District 1, Essex, Orleans.
I'm Mary Howard, and I am the representative for Rutland City, District 6.
And I'm Robin Chestnut Tangerman, Rutland Bennington District.
So welcome. If we wanted to have you in, we're discussing the budget, but we didn't see anything in the budget for Pathways. And Hillary, I think specifically, if we had been able to get you in a month ago, my first question would be, is there going to be anything in the budget that expands Pathways? I know that we have talked about it, but we haven't had a real conversation about expanding Pathways really since the pandemic started. I think we were trying to, the number that seems to stick in my head was that you currently serve X number of counties and it would cost X number of dollars to expand statewide. And, but at any rate, I wanted to give you some time now to talk about not just that, but just really to give us the primer on what Pathways is, which is one of our Housing First organizations, the primary organization. There's Housing First models or rapid rehousing that exists in other agencies, but you are dedicated to rapid rehousing, and I just wanted to give you the opportunity to educate us. The committee, the makeup of the committee has changed immensely since last year, so we have a bunch of folks who may know of Housing First, but I just wanted to introduce you to everybody, and then to go back to and spend some time on what your budget request is for this year and what your thoughts are about expanding. So microphone is yours. Welcome.
Great. Thank you so much for having us. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. Yep.
Yes. I like the panoramic view. I haven't seen that before. My name is Hillary Melton, and I'm the executive director at Pathways Vermont. And I'm joined by our assistant director, Lindsay Mesa. I'm going to I'll give you a brief overview of what Pathways Vermont is, and then Lindsay's going to walk us through the specifics of Housing First and also our two asks. We do have two asks on the table this session, which we had sent those to Ron, so you should have access to them. They're one-pagers describing our asks. Pathways Vermont, and please stop me if you have any questions or want further information. We're a statewide organization, and we provide mental health and housing services. We provide services in every county, though not all of our services are available in every county. We have about 145 staff currently, and we're funded through the Department of Corrections, the Department of Mental Health, UVMMC, also the university itself. We have federal funding through HUD, and also we bill Medicaid for some of our services. As Tom said earlier, we are designated by the Department of Mental Health as a specialized service agency. We work alongside the designated agencies in a statewide capacity. Our specialized designation is for our expertise in the housing first model. And Lindsay is going to give you that story about housing first. We're an integral part of the system of care, and we catch many people who have fallen through the cracks. In addition to our expertise in permanent supportive housing, we run several peer services, including the Pathways Vermont support line. That is a 24/7 support line that anybody in the state of Vermont can call. We take calls from everything ranging from simple connection to support to people who are struggling with mental health challenges. Last year, 2022, we completed 14,000 calls. So there are a lot of Vermonters utilizing that service. In Chittenden County specifically, we have a community center that is peer run, and we provide meals, support groups, employment support, showers, laundry, connection, community. Our final peer project is our Soteria House. That is a 5-bed therapeutic residence available to anybody in Vermont. And that's one of our asks this session too. And Lindsay's going to describe that a little more. Pathways facilitates a coalition of peer-run organizations in Vermont. We're working hard to get a statewide certification for peer workers, and that would enable peer workers in Vermont to bill Medicaid, which we hope will open many more doors to peer services. We're here at the State House because we think we're very good at our specialties, and we think we can do more to help more people. And we're also very good at saving the state money. We help folks stay out of expensive institutions, prisons, hospitals, emergency rooms, shelters, motels. You all know the expense of all those emergency type services. What we do is support people in the community so that they don't access those services on high rates. Our two asks this year are expanding our highly successful Housing First project so that we can do more to end homelessness around the state. And we want to buy a permanent home for our Soteria House so we could expand our services and also save the state money by not paying rent. And I'm going to turn it over to Lindsay.
And actually, before we start with Lindsay, just one quick question. Can you define for Pathways? I can say, oh, well, peer services. I know what those are, maybe. Can you define them for how Pathways works with peers?
Sure. We practice a relationship model, which is a non-hierarchical provision of services. We focus on relationships. It's non-judgmental, person-centered services. 80% of our people that are employed at Pathways identify with some sort of lived experience, whether it's lived experience of mental health crises, suicide, homelessness, substance use, incarceration. Everyone, the majority of people at Pathways have some sort of lived experience that they're bringing to the table in a way that they can connect with people that are also having those experiences. Is that helpful?
That's very helpful. Thank you so much. Representative Chestnut-Tangerman.
I'm sorry, I don't want to derail you from your presentation, but the home that you're talking about, Soteria House?
Yeah.
What is that? Is that short-term temporary shelter? Is it longer, midterm? You trying to find permanent beds for people?
It's a place people can go when they're experiencing what we call a first break psychosis, where young people who start hearing voices or seeing things or hearing things that other people don't hear or see, or they're in acute distress. It's a place that they can go and work through that experience with folks who've had that experience before or similar experiences. It's an alternative to going into the hospital. People can stay 3 to 6 months, sometimes longer, whatever it takes to work through that experience and get people back out on a stable course.
And is it, you said young people, is it specifically young people?
Doesn't have to be young people. Typically, the first time somebody has a severe mental health crisis, it's they're younger, 18, 19, 20, though we have served people of various ages.
Thank you.
All right, Lindsay, welcome. Thank you, Hillary.
You're welcome.
Thank you again for having us this morning. And I apologize, I have a little bit of a cold, so hopefully I'll be intelligible through our conversation. As Hillary introduced, my name is Lindsay Mesa. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the assistant director at Pathways Vermont. And I'm happy to talk with you today about what we think we can do to continue to contribute to the good work that the state is doing. As Hillary mentioned, we have an ask on the table this session around expanding our Housing First program so that we can be statewide in Vermont. This has been a longstanding goal, and the legislative, thank you all. You have worked with us over the years to slowly expand our services to new communities. We are currently operating in 9 community counties across the state with our Department of Corrections program, and in 7 counties across the state with our Department of Mental Health funded programming. Our ask on the table is to expand into all 14 counties. We think we have a really well-walked model of how to do this based on our experience over the past 12 years. We know how to stand up in new communities. We most recently have started that work in Bennington County this year. We are asking this for a couple of reasons at this moment in time. One, because as Hillary described, we see ourselves as a part of the system of care, and we're recognized as a specialized service agency because Pathways is the only provider of the full evidence-based practice of Housing First. In our communities, we're recognized internationally as the first rural implementation of the Housing First model. And for folks who might not be super familiar with it, it is both as simple as it sounds. So the idea of Housing First is that the only thing that actually ends homelessness, right, that ends the experience of homelessness is permanent housing. And so the program design is around getting people into housing as quickly as possible without preconditions like sobriety or treatment compliance. And then we wrap people really well in their homes and in their communities. We provide intensive community-based services that support the variety of life needs someone might have as they stabilize in housing and helps them work towards their other goals. This model, this practice is recognized as a best practice, as it's an evidence-based practice, because when you support someone that way, when you meet someone where they are and you address that immediate need, not only are you resolving the experience of homelessness, but we see better outcomes. So our program sees consistently now over our nearly 12 years of operation, an 85% or higher housing retention rate. So that means people are getting housed and for the most part staying housed long-term in our communities. And that's in comparison with only about a 45% retention rate for, what I think is more widely becoming the old way of doing business, right? Which is a housing readiness model, asking people to meet certain criteria, achieve certain benchmarks and goals prior to accessing permanent housing. So for us, not being statewide is part of, as in part of the system of care available to any Vermonter in our communities is a piece of equity, right? So we would really like to expand so that we can be available to anybody wherever they are that needs this very unique and specialized service. We're also coming to you at this moment in time on the heels of the pandemic because the need is expanded so dramatically in our communities. As you all are, I'm sure so intimately aware, the numbers of people experiencing homelessness in our communities, it has nearly tripled throughout the pandemic. And those folks that are experiencing long-term homelessness, what we call chronic homelessness, so people who have been homeless for a long time and who are also struggling with a disability, those numbers are even greater, right? They've over tripled throughout our state through this pandemic. So we see this also as an important time to stand up more of this good work so that we can support people better to be in our communities. So that's one of our requests today, is to continue that expansion. And then as Hillary mentioned, we also have I think a really unique ask on the table around Soteria House. Soteria lives in the system of care as an alternative to inpatient hospitalization. It saves the state money, a lot of money, because it's much less expensive than somebody being inpatient in the hospital. And we also, Soteria is a model that started in the 1970s, and it was a long-term study and research project. So we also know that models like Soteria House, like our Soteria House, save the state money over the long term in terms of people being less likely to need to access inpatient hospitalization, more likely to be able to fully contribute to their communities in the ways they want by means of full-time employment, family networks, et cetera. We have a unique opportunity to purchase a building. Soteria has been operating since 2014, and we currently rent a large house. We've identified a property in partnership with Champlain Housing Trust in Burlington that we could purchase as a one-time investment, make the purchase and renovations needed to operate it as a Soteria house. And that would really formalize Soteria in our system of care and give it a permanent home for our future. It also is a larger building than we currently operate. So there is the possibility to nearly double the capacity of Soteria. We currently operate a 5-bed residence, and this could be a 9-bed residence. We see that as a really important thing to do, again, in this moment in time wherein all of our mental health resources are so taxed and people are not able to swiftly access the support that they feel is best for them. So these are our 2 requests on the table, and we're happy to take any questions or to speak more about the background of these programs and the history of them as well.
Representative LaBounty.
You said you have like around 145 staff. Are some of those like nurses or doctors or things of that nature?
Yeah, that's right. So in our Housing First program, the way that we deliver services is through a modified assertive community treatment team, so an ACT team. And what essentially an ACT team is it's a community-based team of multidisciplinary staff who provide services to people outside of, for the most part, outside of office environments, but in community environments, right? So in their homes, visiting with them at other doctor's appointments, wherever community is for them. And that multidisciplinary team is comprised of people with diverse lived and professional experiences. So we have people on staff, as Hillary's mentioned, who have experiences themselves of homelessness, mental health challenges, substance use. We also have nursing staff, psychiatry, representative payee services, employment support. So it's a pretty robust package of support that folks are able to receive in our communities.
Thank you.
Representative Chestnut-Tangible.
You mentioned DOC funding for Housing First, and I'm wondering what the nexus is there.
That's an excellent question. So what we're doing with Department of Corrections, I think, is a really exciting and also truly, honestly, an innovative approach to supporting people in our communities. We are funded through Department of Corrections transitional housing grants to provide services, as I said, in 9 communities now. We're now the largest available option for people exiting incarceration in our state. Why Pathways works with correction is one, there's a huge overlap and intersection between people who experience homelessness and those who experience incarceration. folks that experience incarceration are 7 to 11 times more likely to experience homelessness in their lives. And when we started partnering with Department of Corrections in 2010, we were in a moment in time wherein folks were being held past their minimum release, right? So, they'd served their time in incarceration, but they couldn't identify a housing opportunity, right? And there was a pressure on the state to get an option available to people so that they could be released to their communities. So that's part of why we work with them. We also work with them because it gives us the ability to reach farther in a state wherein, the numbers necessarily of people experiencing that really long-term homelessness in any given community might be not so robust, right, to really afford this full service package that I've described. So by reaching to folks, meeting people in incarceration before they exit to their communities and then enter homelessness, we can braid our teams to provide a more full service package to folks exiting incarceration, folks exiting hospitalization, and those folks that are living in our communities who are exiting long-term homelessness.
Thank you. And can I follow up? Last week, no, beginning of this week, I had a meeting with at a Turning Point Center. And I'm wondering, assuming you work with the Turning Point Centers, and you describe that relationship a little bit?
Yeah, I think you're really hitting the nail on the head here, right? Of that folks in our communities are their experience of life is not often as siloed as our resources currently are, right? So people that are living in our communities can be struggling with homelessness and with substance use and with mental health challenges, right? And have incarcerated histories, et cetera. And so our approach is, Turning Point's a community partner for us, right? We refer to them, they refer to us. We support people who are wanting to navigate paths towards sobriety or thinking about ways to use substance, but practicing harm reduction to navigate Turning Point resources, attending meetings with them or groups. It's, I think all of these community resources on the base level have to collaborate and work together to really holistically embrace the person and where they're at and what their support needs are. So.
Yeah, I love the expression that their life experience is not as siloed as our resources.
Lindsay, can you take a big step back now and let's talk about, well, how do if I'm experiencing a break or if I'm homelessness and I need your services, can you just walk through the process of how you would house me stably and who you work with and I'm sure you have a secret trove of apartments that no one else has access to during this housing crisis. But if you could just tell us how you work with landlords, because you don't own the buildings or the units, et cetera. If you could just walk us through what you do when someone comes into the door and says, I need help.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question. And I'll step back really briefly and just give you a little bit of a sense of the system of homelessness response in our state. And then I'll talk specifically about what happens when somebody is working with Pathways. So our state operates what's called a coordinated entry system. This is something that is required by HUD for all communities to implement. And the idea of coordinated entry is for us to know by name everyone in our communities who is experiencing homelessness. And as folks enter homelessness, because unfortunately, as long as poverty persists, as long as our social systems can't rapidly support each other in the ways that we hope they eventually will be able to, right? New people enter homelessness. So to quickly identify as people enter homelessness, know them by name, and then have an objective way in which we measure what their support needs will be to exit homelessness. because that's going to vary, right? For some people, have enough resources that they will be able to resolve their experience of homelessness themselves. For many, many more people, working with somebody like Pathways, right, is, and having the ability to have long-term support in their communities post being housing it's going to be what it takes. So when Pathways is working with someone, we're taking somebody from this list, right, of names and identifying the folks that are most vulnerable in our communities and most in need of this long-term and intensive support to resolve homelessness for them for good, and to really stabilize them in our communities. We have an intake coordinator that meets with people and takes, basic demographic information, and then does the work to get somebody connected to a form of rental assistance. So because we're working with people that are living in poverty, housing's not affordable without rental assistance, right? So it's important that we identify an ongoing way that housing can be affordable for them so that when they get housed, it truly can be permanent. Then folks meet with our teams, and we have part of the Housing First model is to have a dedicated housing team whose job is the relationship to the landlords in our communities and to the units. So it's their job to build relationships with landlords, to find housing in our communities, and then to care for those units so that people are, when they're living in housing, they're living well in housing and sustainably in housing. That dedicated team is part of it. I mean, I really think it's the reason why we have been able to continue to get people housed as the market changes in our communities. We have no secret pot of housing, and we too feel the stress of the lack of housing availability in our communities. But we have a wonderful network of primarily private landlords. We work with over 150 private landlords across our state, as well as partnerships with bigger housing providers like housing trusts in our communities, such that we're able to identify housing for folks. And as you said, these are rentals in communities. So people view the units, they opt in, they say, this is the community I want, here's the amenities that are important to me, right? Here are my priorities. And when housed, they're then visited by that robust service team that I spoke about, who support them to identify their plans and their goals, and then approach those relationships in this very, very person-centered and individual way, that I think also is part of the key to why we get to build relationship with folks who have traditionally maybe been really disconnected from services, or either because they tried and kind of failed out of them, or because they wouldn't approach a service provider. And it's really a beautiful thing to witness. Honestly, it's an exciting program to be a part of.
And so the relationship too with landlords, do you sign master leases? Do the individuals sign the leases? Again, I would think that landlords would, we of course have heard the whole gamut of destruction or care taken with apartments. And can you just talk about how you build the relationships with landlords and what kind of services you provide when things go wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a mix of tools in our toolkits, right? So we do some, what you're describing, master lease agreements, which means that the landlord rents to us, right? And then we sublet and rent to our tenant in our programs. We also have, the majority of our households actually directly lease to their landlords. And so they have an independent lease agreement, and we're serving, right, as their support network and system. Being a landlord, I don't know if we have any landlords in the room, but it is an inherently, right, a risk to be a landlord in our communities. And one of the things that we talk about with our landlords is that there actually aren't really any great, as much as we all try to screen, right, and identify the perfect tenant, the research shows that you can't really predict how any person's going to do in any given housing unit, right? And so landlords are taking risks anytime that they rent to a tenant. And certainly it's not our folks necessarily that are causing the most trouble in our communities, right? You might rent to a college kid and, they have all their friends over, right? Like things happen. The benefits that a landlord has in working with us is that they have us. They have someone for, a dedicated person and team of people for whom if things aren't working, or they need support, we're going to be that intermediary between the landlord and the tenant, right? We do a lot of mediation. We do a lot of education for tenants because most of the time we're working with folks for whom it's been a long time since they've lived in an apartment, been a long time since they've seen a lease agreement, right? And really understood what they're obligated to do. So that in and of itself, I think is a real benefit to the landlord that if things do get tough, they're not alone in it. Landlords think about time and money, right? So we can save them time in having those conversations directly. And we oftentimes can save them money because we're really present in people's housing. So we are also identifying with tenants what could become future issues before they're major issues, right? And if things aren't working, we have resources too to, we're going to keep working with that tenant. We're going to try to find them another apartment. We actually see very, very few full evictions in our whole history of over 12 years because we're most often able to negotiate something between the tenant and landlord that's in everyone's best interest. And we do also have, a small pot of resources such that in those situations where we've all tried our best and there are still damages, above normal wear and tear, we can help contribute to that process so that landlords are not alone in that financial burden as well.
And last question from me right now is, so I'm incarcerated, I'm coming out, I've come to you, I need help, I go through intake, we find an apartment, but I have no belongings. How do I start my life? Restart it.
Yeah, it's I appreciate that you said that. One of my coworkers is somebody who came to work for Pathways because he specifically wanted to support people out of incarceration because he's had that lived experience. And he described that what you're saying as one of the most challenging things, right? Is like literally don't even have a toothbrush to start with, right? Where do you go? What do you do? So for us, an important part of our move-in process is that we provide people with what we call a move-in kit. And it is those basics, right? It's the toothbrush, the bedding, the shower curtain, the dishes, right? The things that most folks can't hold on to in that experience, right, of being out of the community for a time. We work with we work with people and their local vendors, the resource, right? We have a voucher Resource has a voucher program that we utilize to help people get connected to furniture or other needs. An important part of our moving kit is like a bed and a frame, right? Because again, it's rare that folks have been able to hang on to a full-size mattress while incarcerated. So that's part of the package, and it's an important part, I think, a small thing, right? But an important part of people feeling like when they're entering their apartment, they're coming home to something rather than just four walls.
And the services that come with that, I mean, I think there's really, it's more invisible to people when we think about how are we ending homelessness and what it takes, that it's more than four walls and a roof. And so the information that you provided us, I would just urge us to look at it. What is always striking is the amount of money saved in comparison to other resources. I think Hillary, when we first met back in 2012 or whatever it was, the difference between an emergency room bed and an apartment through Pathways, but any apartment, but through Pathways with the services wrapped around the savings are just remarkable that, I mean, some of it may turn out to be what ifs. What if we didn't have this program and how much would it cost? But I think that it's hard for people to believe that we're coming out of the pandemic where motel rooms cost $3,500 a month, which, unfortunately can only rent a small 2-bedroom house now in many communities, but nevertheless, it's not a hotel room. So anything else, any further questions for our folks from Pathways? Representative Lieber?
Thank you. Hillary, I guess this would probably be a question directed to you. Presently, you're in, as I understood it, 9 counties. Do you have development plans to get to the remaining counties? I come from the northern part of the state. It would be very nice to have facilities that you've just described. When a young student or a young person has a psychotic break, that they have a respite house, if you will, for temporary treatment therapy from somebody who's lived the experience, but also from evaluation by professionals that can help this person.
Your person in the north would be could come to Soteria. They'd have to, we'd even drive and get them. One of the problems is we're almost always full. And it's random when there's an opening. That's one of the reasons we want to purchase this building so that we could double our capacity and serve more people. So we could, the Soteria House is a statewide service available for anybody in Vermont. Our other services, we would love to have them also be statewide. We've incrementally grown really based on you all. Last year, there was a big push from the Bennington delegation, and we could increase our services into Bennington. But if not for the representatives and senators from Bennington, we wouldn't have increased into that area. So if we're not in your area, I think the ask from the local sources is what's been, in our experience, helpful. Less helpful for us to say we want to be all over the state than for people to say we need this service as well. And Bennington did a really great job promoting the need for our services in Bennington. That seemed to be helpful last year.
Thank you.
So explain why you're limited. I mean, is this part of being an SSA? Is this part of getting certificated into, is it purely capacity that you
can? It's money. It's just funding, resources. Yeah, our ask to be statewide is $2.13 million, which is such chump change compared to all the money flying around, I think. But for, a couple of $1 million, we could create a system for the state so that people would have access to Housing First services. And that's, we've been asking this for really long time. And
it's gone way up from 2 million to 2.13. So, and yes.
Yeah.
4 years ago, it wasn't considered chump change. It's
now it seems,
so no federal money was allowed to be used?
It's an ongoing expense. So the federal funds were one-time funding used for an emergency situation. So we think like Soteria House would be one-time funding. We could access some of that money, I think. For Housing First services, we have to invest in a service that's going to be around. So it's not going to be one and done.
Yeah. Thank you. Representative Chestnut Tangeman?
Talking about money as the biggest hurdle, the other thing we constantly hear about is lack of workforce. With the money, could you find the people to do the work?
think so. We tend to have less, we've had less workforce issues than other folks have had. I think part of that is mission driven, because people who have lived through something awful want to give back, and we hire folks that have lived through awful things and support them to give back. So I think we've had more success in our asks. Like everybody else, we're raising the minimum wage so that it's at least a livable wage. So our asks have increased to support that. I think we have to be competitive with the bagel store these days.
Yes, the bagel store being used as the $24 an hour, I know that one well. I've driven by it a number of times.
Yeah.
I lied though. I have one more question. There are 2,300 or 1,600 households, 2,300 people currently that we know of that are experiencing homelessness that are in the motel programs. We have a couple of thousand, perhaps more, people exiting the VRAP program by June 30th. And, one of the factoids surrounding that is that for many of those people, rent is equivalent to 100% of their income. I don't think you handled 2,000 or 4,000 or 6,000 Vermonters. Have you been, besides dreading all of this, have you been able to kind of start imagining what the solutions should be? I mean, the hotel program did what it had to do at the time that it had to do it, but obviously it's coming to an end. And that's something that we're going to be grappling with throughout the course of, a lot more front burner than we used to, because the numbers are a lot higher than they used to, because now we were able to count them as opposed to guess. So thoughts on, in the next 3 minutes about, and we could follow up, of course, but just what we're looking at from your perspective?
Well, I'll say something, and Lindsay, you can say something, but I'll say something about just the housing crisis. And thank you for everything you're doing to make a difference in the housing crisis, whether it's zoning or more funding, or we're just not building enough housing fast enough. And there's too many barriers to building housing. So that is one big piece that's, intersects a lot of different pieces, but that's not going to change. We need to fix that problem. Lindsay, do you want to add something?
No, I think that's it. I mean, I think that what it takes to end homelessness in our communities is housing that's affordable, and the right level of services, right, to support people. It's always going to be that three-legged stool, and we get this beautiful benefit of, we see it working on an individual level every day, right? Like, we can successfully connect a person if we have those three things, right? It works. People stay stabilized. What we haven't done, and what we are now so pressured to do as our communities, is scale it, right? So we need more housing in general, and then we need more housing that's affordable in general, and then we need more service packages in general, right? So I think that's what our state is tasked with, is just scaling to meet the need, and it's a tremendous need. And we don't think we can solve the problem for every single person, and we want to be a part of a network in our community that does it. What we do think we can do, though, is we can successfully work with the folks who might have the most trouble accessing that broader system, right? And who might have the highest level of support needs. And we want to work with those folks and support them in our communities.
And is it easier to have them in a shared living space, like a multi-unit building, than it would be to have them in individual, like tiny homes, or, some kind of, we've heard a lot recently, over the last 5 years about, let's say tiny homes, great idea, but maybe not. If it's isolated, if it's not around other people, again, if somebody needs to be socialized as opposed to being isolated, which exists as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think what we hope for, what we want is true choice in our communities, right? So if somebody wants to live in a tiny home, then awesome. We want a tiny home to be available to them. We'll go see them in their tiny home. We're happy to support them, right? If somebody wants to live in a larger apartment complex, they want an elevator in their building for accessibility needs, et cetera. We want to be able to support people there too, right? So I think that what we hope to see in our communities is expanded access to a wide variety of options, because what we know is that when people opt into something that they feel is right for them, they invest in it, right? And then all of those things we talked about in terms of what it looks like to work with a landlord, what it looks like for people to stop cycling within institutions, that's going to be better, right? When people are in a place that truly feels like home to them.
That's the correct answer. And I'll give you a
Give her a raise.
that is the correct answer. I'll give you a lived experience answer. I have an adult son with disabilities. He lived in his Section 8 voucher, and he lived in a complex that was all people living in poverty. And the difference between when he moved, I don't know if you know Keene's Crossing and Winooski, he moved with his voucher to a mixed income complex, and it was night and day. So I'm a big believer in mixed income stories. Like, putting everybody with serious problems in one place is not a good formula in my experience.
No, thank you for bringing that up, because the other thing that's floating out in the ether, which is a little bit different, and I have a different image perhaps than other people, but is this idea that when it comes to zoning, that somebody might want to, can we turn a mall into housing? I mean, it's like, to me, that kind of malls made me nervous in the first place. But again, the thought of redeveloping a mall into housing is that, it's a different kind of gated community. Anyway, that's the reminder that mixed income was an integral change, not only for mental health, but for poverty, to make sure that the communities were balanced, and that these projects were balanced in some way, for that very reason.
We could put a tiny home in everybody's backyard. That would be a good answer. Then you'd have people. Yeah, well, then you have people living in the community. You have the problems are spread out. People rise to the occasion when they're living in a better community. They rise to the occasion versus joining the party. Are
they going to mow my lawn?
Depends on what you put in your lease.
Yeah, there you go. All right. Well, thank you, Hillary. Thank you, Lindsay, so much for sharing the story with us. Committee, again, it seems like the facts that are in the handouts are unreal, but they're not. And it's also, like I said, the scaling of this upwards is incremental. We know that, and it's not going to solve the whole problem. But what an incredibly important niche for us as we try to deal with what is really seems on a bad day really an intractable problem. So thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Thank you for keeping Pathways going and for getting it as insinuated into our state as you have. And we will, as we work on certainly on the budget asks, we will certainly consider this, putting in a sentence about this as well. So
great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
All right, committee, we'll take a 10-minute break, and then we'll be back with some more bill introductions, Representative Burrows and I. And then at 11, in the 11 hour, we'll have the first of two blocks with Josh Hanford from ACCD, the Department of Housing and Community Development, who will talk about, he still wanted to give a general overview, kind of like what this was. We weren't able to fit him in January, and then some specific issues related to the budget that the VHIP program, the middle income program, that we'll be hearing some about in relation to H111 and or the Senate bill. So let's take 10 minutes.